Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Welcome to Untold Stories with Adeswa. I am here with the former governor of Lagos State, former Minister of Power, and former Minister of Works and Housing, Babatunde Fashola SAN. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Adeswa. How are you?
I'm very fine, thank you. So this is not our first conversation.
By no means.
And this is not our first conversation for this show, but this is the first one on video. So
Precisely.
I'm happy we're able to do this again before the launch of your first ever book.
Yeah.
So my first question is, why this book and why now?
Okay. Timing is always important. And why this book? Well, the book was provoked. It was not my own idea, as it were. So we were, as people normally do, having conversations about developmental issues of the country, of our age, and some of those issues came up. And somebody said, look, why don't you write these things down? And that was the beginning of the book. So it started 2 years ago, whilst I was still serving. First draft was ready, was editing the manuscripts. Then on one of my tours to Lagos, I misplaced the over half edited version of it.
Oh, wow.
So I just said, okay, that's it. I'm not writing anymore. And settled down again to my daily chore as minister, mails, files, memos, and you know what. So when I finished my tour of duty in May 2023, again, developmental issues and conversations. And so we said, why don't you write? I said, I've written something, I can't find the edited copy. So I got volunteers to edit. And after that, Shukmosha Shore was one of the volunteers. So was Jamio Abiola and Hakim Bello. And when they finished, they said, now you have to still edit because you must own the language. So, and here we are.
So in your book, you talk about these various topics. You said you were provoked. So were you provoked by the issues or were you provoked by people? Because you talk about restructuring, you talk about some more personal things while going to an event and they spend over an hour, mentioning the names of all the important people there. But you also don't talk a lot about your own personal anecdotes. Was that intentional?
No, I mean, and I think that perhaps there lies the contradiction. You acknowledge that some of the things that have been discussed in the book are from my personal experience. But perhaps the way and the context in which the script of the book is written was not to personalize it, but to, as it were, kind of provoke an interrogation of the conversation and to see. My job would have been done if there are other views or if there are concurring views that reinforce and say, okay, I think that this is the best way to go. My job would have been done once there is the interest to interrogate some of those subjects further. Okay. I would have achieved my purpose.
Let's interrogate some so people have an idea of what's in the book. One of the first, I would say, personal examples you give is about this idea of governors going to Abuja to share money and how a foreigner says to you, like, does this mean Nigeria doesn't have a banking system? Why are the governors going to Abuja to share money? And I had an issue with that being your example of us should be careful about how we talk about Nigeria, because it reminded me of this Toni Morrison quote in that, like, there will always like the purpose of racism, or even if it's a black person that said this, but the purpose of like racism and looking down on Africans is that it's a distraction. It's always forcing you to explain. They'll say you have no language and you spend time explaining that you have a language, and then they'll say our skulls are different, and then we spend time investigating our skulls. I feel that when people say, for example, another thing you pointed out is that people always say the Nigerian president is the most powerful president. Someone saying governors are going to the center to share money, it is, I would say, similar to what Femi Okunuasian says in the introduction to your book, where he talks about how often people see governors in Abuja because they want to get their allocations, right? So why do you, so I want to know like why you take issue with people using this language, to describe the activity.
So you will see that the book first headlines Nigeria's public discourse, and then it underlines the interplay between hyperbole and there's some part of it there that deals with our own indigenous language. And I have suggested at some time that, look, perhaps part of where the problem and perhaps the hyperbole comes from is that we think indigenously and subconsciously then translate our indigenous thoughts into English. And English is not our first language. And therefore, in that process, a lot of meaning and context is lost. So, if you permit me, àwọn gómìnà lọ gbowó l'Abuja. Wọ́n lọ pín owó l'Abuja. And no such things are happening in Abuja by governors. The people who attend those meetings, as I've explained in the book, are the accountant generals and the commissioners for finance. The governors have no role in that process at all. But it is an idea that has settled with us as part of post-1999 politics.
Yes, but
so
can I ask
it's not true, it's not correct, and it's inaccurate. But I thought that that was perhaps exemplary of some of the other conversations I wanted to have, and I thought it was a place to open the conversation.
So when people say governors are going to Abuja to share money or they're going there to collect money, there is this perception because we're in a very low trust society. And again, even as somebody who's in Abuja frequently, I would say that I frequently see governors, right? And so the idea is, why are they often in Abuja? Now,
interesting and very, very good angle to interrogate the matter. There are statutory meetings, constitutional bodies that governors are part of. One of them is the Nigerian Economic Council, National Economic Council, chaired by the Vice President. Ideally, I think that council holds meetings. We urge that the meetings then be held more frequently, monthly. And there is, I believe, the Council of State and the Police Council. Governors are part of all. So if those meetings are going to be held, they are often and usually always held in Abuja. What do governors need to do? I can only speak of my time. In 8 years, the longest I stayed in Abuja was 2 nights consecutively. 2 nights. And that happened only twice in 8 years. So oftentimes I will go the night before, and governors will have a pre-meeting because we're 36, and we knew that it was going to be inefficient for 36 of us to be speaking at the next day's meeting. So we will articulate positions and say, Governor, this will speak on this issue on there, and so that the meetings are business-like and efficient. Immediately those meetings finished, for me, I was heading to the airport. So for governors who then choose to stay in Abuja, I think that those who they are accountable to should ask them what they are doing in Abuja. I don't know. I don't know, honestly, no, and I can't speak about things that I don't know. But I didn't see what kept me. And there were times when, as governor then, I had to go and see either President Jonathan or President Yar'Adua, who were two presidents whose tenures overlapped mine.
Yeah.
And I didn't see myself staying in Abuja for days. My work was in Lagos, and that was where I was.
Yeah, so what you're saying is there are legitimate reasons for governors
Oh, yeah,
to be in Abuja.
Yeah, from time to time.
But again, we should hold them accountable if our governor is missing for time on end.
Well, you use the word.
Yeah, I would use the word we should hold our governors accountable.
No, you use the word missing.
Oh, missing.
I don't think any governor is missing.
Missing from action. I also wanted to hone in on this idea of lack of trust in our elected officials. So appointed officials, ministers are appointed, our governors are elected. I feel like Nigeria is generally a low trust society, but beyond that, people don't trust politicians, quote unquote.
When it comes to money, the sensitivities and the sensibilities are quite different. But I think on other issues, there is a relatively encouraging level of trust in the society. In the political space, you will be perhaps surprised to find out that no country really is an outlier in that sense. There is general skepticism, if you like, about the role and the performance of governance in first and third world economies, the democracies. People are beginning to challenge things because they now have a voice created on social media, even if the quality of the language, perhaps, the quality of the depth of rigor can be improved upon. But I think the other issue, as I've said to some of my colleagues, is for all of us to remember that there is nothing divine about democracy. It was a man-made idea, and I don't know any man-made idea that is timeless. And so perhaps the idea of democracy, as we know it, is being challenged because it may have reached the zenith of its utility. But let me be very clear and not misunderstood. I am not suggesting any undemocratic choice. I am just saying, hey, let us understand that everything has its utilitarian shelf life. What it will be, I don't know. It may be an idea that your generation will say, this is how best to now govern ourselves and to organize our ideas. But I value the freedoms that democracy has given us as against authoritarianism and all of those other extreme type of governments to which I do not subscribe at all, at all.
You know, I agree, because as a country with multiple ethnicities and multiple tribes, when you have a democracy, when majority wins, we have, I believe, an issue with representation for smaller tribes, you know. So I'm from a minority tribe, even though we're very big. We're a very big kingdom. But I also think, especially now that we see in the Middle Belt region, where you have a lot of minority tribes and you have insecurity, a lot of small tribes feel marginalized. They feel like they do not have access to the center or even access in terms of their state apparatus. And this is a conversation we're having. And the reason why I even want to bring that back to your book is because how do you feel about restructuring? I feel like that part of it, I read it, and you have a part talking about, is the Constitution the problem? And the 1999 Constitution, I talk about the history of it. But also, I felt like, I'm not sure if I got an answer. And I was like, I'm trying to understand here, how do you feel about restructuring? Especially, you know, in terms of this democracy that we're talking about.
So I suspect you're almost out of your depth. So let me comment there. I think, first of all, that I have been involved in the restructuring question at two levels. First, as Chief of Staff to Governor Tinubu, I was the resource person for the political conference organized by President Obasanjo. So I saw all the papers and I followed the conversations. And that was the closest we came, actually, to some kind of constitutional alterations that perhaps dealt with the issues of the day. Of course, the issues have since changed. And perhaps, therefore, those solutions, if they had not been lost in the two-third, because the National Assembly just threw everything out. If those had been changed, perhaps we might have been in a better place. But it's, for me, also realizing and understanding that nation building, national development is not an event, it's a process. So if you amend the Constitution, it will fit only the purpose for the time. New identity issues have emerged globally today that perhaps no constitution in the world is able to deal with because they were not anticipated 30, 40 years ago. You are going to see those amendments go on from time to time, from area to area. But the point to make is that I don't think that the problem is in a document. And I think it's important to stress that point. The problem is not in a document. The people don't want a better document. And I think I made that point. They want a better life.
Okay.
So you can write everything into a document. How does that document become life? How does that document take food to the table? How does it provide work? How does it provide support to 40 plus million MSMEs who are the largest employers of labor? And I don't think a constitution is what is going to give MSMEs the silver bullet. I always ask myself, what would be the big revolution? Just this morning, I was thinking, what is the one thing that I can do for 40 million MSMEs to employ one person each? That's 40 million jobs. What's a singular thing? What's a silver bullet?
I have one bullet. I don't know if it's a silver bullet, but the Land Use Act.
What's your problem with the Land Use Act? You tell me.
Governors are too powerful.
So.
And even when you speak about.
So make the argument.
Okay, land being vested in a governor, they're just too powerful for me personally. I feel some land should be owned on more local levels.
So
I don't think
the Land Use Act preserves some local holdings. It did. And you have to understand there's history to the Land Use Act. Mm-hmm. You have to understand. And the situation before the Land Use Act, and pardon me if I say so, you were not born then, is that if you bought land, in many judgments, they were recorded. You were buying a lawsuit. There was communal clashes. I witnessed as a teenager people hacking themselves to death across ethnic and geopolitical lines over land. So that was what led to the Land Use Act.
Do you think it's flawed?
Nothing is perfect. Nothing man-made is perfect. But I think, and I've made the argument, the answer for me, and I'm emotional about this, the Land Use Act is about the only legislation in Nigeria that I can almost confidently say every section of it has been litigated to the Supreme Court. Every section. So there's clarity. And that's a lot of jurisprudence. And to throw away that legislation is to throw away a lifetime's work of jurisprudence of the courts, of lawyers. Now, I think, my views, the problem is not with the act. The problem is with the administration and implementation of the act. The governor is a trustee. Now, when that law was made, there were no computers as we know them. I had that problem, for example, the time it takes to sign COOs. And from signing a dozen, 100 a day, I started signing 700 a day. What did I do? We did digital mapping of the whole of Lagos. We started producing our COOs electronically. I started signing electronically. That's an administrative approach that I don't think all states have implemented. So if we do that, because we haven't fully used the law, and we're in a hurry again to say repeal it, and it's the administration of the act. What's the role of governor? Trustee, for the benefit of everybody. Put a process in place that is digital. People have records. You can apply for land, and if the land is there, you can go online and see the location. We have Google Maps today. You can see everybody's house. But have we transposed that to our land administration? Perhaps not in enough quantity. So before we start hacking away the law, have we put in place technology to automate? And you can't begin to continue to write COO one by one in a ledger and hope that then you will serve people. So perhaps if that is done, then we can say, okay, what then is the problem? It's just like the constitution that people are saying we should amend. Which part do you want amended? Which part?
For me personally, I don't have a part of the constitution I want to amend. But I like that you said that the problem is not in the law, it's in the administration, or the problem is not in what is written down a lot of the times. The problem is in the, maybe I'll say, political reality, or the reality we see ourselves in. Because one thing you stress a lot in that book is that the Nigerian president is not the most powerful president in the world. Constitutionally.
Hyperbole?
Yes.
Bombast?
However, when people say that, it is because of the body language and the imagery that is coming from our political class. The reason why the average Nigerian will say the Nigerian president is overly powerful is because the Senate president will wear the Nigerian president's logo to plenary to sit in the Senate. The personal logo of the president is being worn by the Senate president. We have governors who just won cases at the Supreme Court, and they're not thanking the justice, they're not thanking the rule of law, they are thanking the president. So why would an average Nigerian not say our president is super powerful if our governors are saying, thank you for not wading into my case, that's why I won? So
perhaps what I am saying might have started to resonate, that power does not lie where we really think it does. The president is not an absolute custodian of power, but a custodian of power in a constitutional democracy with checks and balances. And then there's a difference between his powers, his duties, and his functions, and we should not conflate them. But you see, now there was a point I was going to make, it's all gone, but it will come back. It's just to, again, situate our assumptions. Yes, this is the point. That power then vests us perhaps with an expectation that the president can make everything happen. I've been in situations where people ask me, so why doesn't the president tell these governors what to do? I said, the president didn't appoint them. Say, so he doesn't have power over them. No, he doesn't.
You're saying that...
Just a minute. Pardon me. And perhaps some people have not left the militarization of Nigerian politics. But people even forget that they elected the governors and they expect the president to then have control over them. And happily, today's president was a governor who demonstrated the independence of state governors from the might of the federal government when he was Governor Tinubu. So, and again, that validates the point that there are certain things the president cannot do. And interestingly, as I said to somebody, so we've had like 4 or so presidential elections since 1999. Every one of them, except this sitting president, Tinubu, every one of them has come in a gale of goodwill. And perhaps they have left with people saying, okay, I wasn't particularly thrilled. Now, that itself would be the work of research in some other jurisdictions. Why does this always end like that? And perhaps somebody has inverted the norm now. He's coming with less goodwill, and let's hope that he will live with a lot of thunder and a lot of applause. So, but those are the kind of things that we should be asking ourselves. Are we expecting too much from the president? What constitutional role does the president have with regards to things that affect the majority of people, water supply, sanitation, getting a business permit, paying rent? And those are things that are not the responsibility of the Nigerian president.
Yes, but I feel like
Excuse me.
I felt like you completely sidestepped what I said.
Did I?
Mm-hmm.
Go back to it.
As an average Nigerian, if I say our president is powerful, or if I say the president has power over a governor, does a governor, for example, we just had Supreme Court affirm Basani, affirm Dakwa Abiodun, affirm the APC in Nasarawa, and we even have opposition candidates who are going PDP governors, even the LP governor, Alex Otti, saying thank you to the president for their affirmation, saying thank you to Tinubu, personally thanking the president for the Supreme Court affirming their election. If they are acting like that, they are acting as though he has power over them and that he has power over the courts. So what that is doing is validating this theory that, you know what, our president is all powerful.
I think it is those governors to whom you are referred who should be in the best position to explain why they are thanking the president for a judgment given by an independent arm of government, a judiciary. I was governor. I faced election petitions. My election petitions were resolved in my favor, and I did not thank President Umaru Yar'Adua for that determination. And indeed, thanking the Supreme Court is just perhaps even stating the obvious. That is their job to do justice as they see it and understand it. And so it speaks to something, in my view, about how they understand the mechanics of governance and the Constitution. But I understand it differently. And so I play it differently.
Okay. Let's talk about, because you just spoke about your time as governor, but I want to talk a little bit about your time as Minister of Works and Housing. I actually did not want to misquote you on this one, so I wrote it down. It's about the 45% of roads, because I really want to ask you. Okay, you said you were talking about data on the survey they did on the federal roads in Nigeria. And you said this data, if indeed accurate, contravenes the hyperbolic notion that all Nigerian roads are in a state of disrepair. It is an elementary mathematical fact that 45% does not encompass the entirety. This is, of course, you're kicking against like the hyperbole of all our roads are bad, all our roads are bad. I have two questions to ask you about that. Because of our previous conversation, I know that Nigerian roads have injured your back.
No, Nigerian roads did not injure my back. It was me traveling and sitting down in a coaster because of my height and leg room for 12 hours a day. What's the word now? Not causative, that contributed, because the causative factor was already injury from football.
Okay.
It was always there.
Okay.
Diagnosed since when I was chief of staff, actually. So it has nothing to do with Nigerian roads injuring my back.
Okay.
I was
contributed to your injury?
It aggravated it, because look, if you sit down, whether on the best of roads or even on a flight where there is no bump, a 12-hour flight, they tell you to get up and walk. That's basic metabolic management and science and good posturing for the skeletal system. So that has nothing to do with it at all.
I have another question.
And then let me make this point before you go to the next point. You see, again, and I am not denying that certain challenges exist. On the contrary, no. I am saying that as the person responsible for bringing the information, because government also works on information to be able to address things, and for the person responding to the information, it would be helpful if there was some exactitude. Now, recently, somebody was quoting this budget team, budget, on Twitter. Somebody was quoting him, and I'm not sure if they quoted him correctly or they quoted him out of context, but somebody was quoting him and saying that Nigeria does not have 300 kilometers of motorable road. Now, that for me is hyperbole. It is factually wrong. And you see, if I was an investor who has never been to Nigeria, and I hear that, oh, Nigeria does not have 300 kilometers of motorable road, what kind of investment message are you sending to me? And those are the things I want, because I know if you look at Abuja to Kano, for example, is 365 kilometers. I know that. We've completed Kaduna section to Kano. That's 200 kilometers. We've completed Lagos-Ibadan. That's already, 2 roads already give you 300 kilometers of motorable road. And there's work left to be done on the Abuja to Kaduna section and many other roads. But it does not accurately or fairly paint the picture of my country and your country to the public. And those are the conversations I am concerned about.
But beyond just the populace,
every country has
perception,
has a bad part of their household. But every country, and most countries rather, are putting the living room of their country, which is well decorated, on the front desk.
Okay.
Why shouldn't we be doing something similar while acknowledging that, okay, there are things that we need to clean up?
I want to say that I agree with you. And the reason why I agree with you, and I think lots of Nigerians agree with you, is that in April of 2018, former president and your former boss, Muhammadu Buhari, said on an international stage that more than 60% of the population is below 30. A lot of them haven't been to school. And they are claiming that Nigeria is an oil-producing country, therefore they should sit and do nothing. Get housing, healthcare, and education for free. 2 years earlier, in February of 2016, with an interview with the UK Telegraph, former President Muhammadu Buhari said that some Nigerians in the UK, mostly youth, are disposed to criminality. This idea of demarketing Nigeria, I think, goes beyond people on social media.
Oh, without a doubt.
How did you feel about those comments?
Well, I thought that his concerns could have, there was always room to say, to express perhaps his concerns differently. But it's not my place to teach anything to anybody. Especially, you must understand how challenging the role of a president can be. I've never been there, so I don't know how hot that seat is. So I can't pontificate about what it feels to sit in his chair.
Do you have any intentions of one day perhaps being there?
Well, as I've said before, I don't look far ahead of myself when it comes to political developments. So I'm content to focus on one day at a time, what I'm doing now, which is resting. Okay. And allowing you to intrude into my rest time.
You have allowed me to intrude into your rest time, your home, and I'm really appreciative. And
you're welcome.
I'm sorry for this next question, but I'm not sorry.
Well, you ask, and I will decide how I answer.
Yes. There's a part in your book where you talk about the limits of presidential powers, and you talk about former President Buhari, and that was in relation to Endsars. And I have had a question to ask you since that period, which is, what happened at the toll gate when you picked up that camera?
I'm very happy that you asked this question. And let me say, first of all, that the event at the toll gate and the way that some sections of Nigerians turned it into a comedy, if you like, appeared to have at least helped Nigeria diffuse the tension. And for me, if that helped the country pull itself back from the precipice, it was worth the allegations or the innuendos, if you like. Now, I was involved in the construction of that toll gate, so I knew the place. Now, my mindset when the president sent us to Lagos and said that we should go to the scene. In fact, some of my colleagues said we shouldn't go. And then there was a debate, and people said, look, some people were sensitive to the fact that the president never spoke about this. Let's go there and go and see what's there. So as we got out and we were walking, I just saw the glittering object. And I said, well, this might be evidence a tribunal or something had been set up at the time. Governor, ask your people to come and take it. So instead of people suggesting the innuendos and their minds had all started inventing all sorts of things, the question to ask is what happened to the camera? I handed it over there. The cameras, the footages show that. So the question is, okay, assuming as some minds were suggesting that whether it was contrived, I won't contrive that kind of thing. Those who know me know who I am. I deal with the facts as they are. I don't invent facts, whether I like those facts or not. That's what we all saw, and we handed it over in the event that maybe it would be helpful to help the inquiry as to what happened that night. Strangely, nobody has said anything about it. The tribunal said nothing about it. So it's not my place.
About the camera?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
So it's not my place to then say. So, and I've read all sorts of things. Some people say, oh, it was planted there. It was not likely to be there. But the truth is that 2 weeks after or 3 weeks after the incident, after people had gone to sweep, the tribunal visited, if I recall, and still found bullet shells. So all the evidence clearly was not lost. And for the interrogating mind, this is where I came from. I came from the criminal justice system. I'm a lawyer. And I know that when crime is reported, if you are painstaking, if you are patient, evidence doesn't evaporate. It's human activity. But to suggest that, oh, the innuendo, that, oh, that camera came there from some...
So you
and I still have, at the appropriate time I'll put it out, I still have also our own footage of the reporters who followed us, of the events that happened there after I picked the camera, because I then went, because there are open vents there. I was involved, that maybe there was something that might help the investigation. That was all I was doing.
So even after you found the camera, when investigators, when they still found bullet casings?
The tribunal went long after. So there was evidence all over the place.
There were items just...
Yes, all over the place. So if proper, and I'm not putting down anybody, if proper forensics had been done, we might have found things that would have helped perhaps more in getting closer to the truth. There was always room, in my view, for that, because, I mean, this is the age of science, and human activity doesn't evaporate. Up to hair, you will find there, and that's DNA for those who care to look and who want to find out what happened.
There's a part in your book.
So there's nothing to be sorry about the question.
No, because
when we keep quiet sometimes, we have a lot more to say. And perhaps our silence is golden to allow the temperatures to cool down. When the temperatures perhaps have cooled down, people might be able to become more objective to say, oh, is this what happened?
Yes. There's a line in your book that says, but I'm not sure if it's yourself or and that writes this, but people tend to find solace in an age-old falsehood rather than a newfound truth. I think it might have been him, because it's very early in the book. But what falsehoods about yourself or governance do you think, like, which one really bothers you when you think about public perception of yourself?
You see, I tell people that once something has happened before, it's not new. It doesn't bother me. Once there's a... So every public officer has had one thing or the other around which he or she would have been better understood. But really and truly, I don't bother myself. Things don't bother me like that. If they do, you will see me up and about trying to change them. So to the extent that I'm not bothered about some of the things, the ones that I'm concerned about are the ones that I think that for the development of the country, I should express my thoughts.
There is a part of your book, which I really want everyone to read this book, but there is a part of your book that I struggled with. I was very upset.
Really?
I was like, oh, I was reading it in anger. And then I now got to the part where it said, you cannot tell people to go and vote in anger. And I was like, this is making me angry. And that is the part where you call INEC our most esteemed. Wait, I'm not even, I told myself, there is no way I am going to paraphrase
Okay, don't paraphrase.
An SAN. So I need to find where you say about INEC. Oh my goodness. I feel like I wrote it, but now I can't. INEC, our esteemed electoral umpire, which is subject to undue censure.
Yeah.
And there is a whole appendix, which I appreciate, where you talk about the work INEC does in other African countries and helps them with their electoral processes. But for me, as a Nigerian citizen, I am happy for them, but it is not my business. My business is INEC's failures in Nigeria.
So let us talk about one or two of them if you have the time.
Okay.
So what failures? I have come out to criticize INEC, so let that be on record. I've come out to criticize INEC and the need for them to improve. So INEC is an institution and it can improve. So let us understand that. But INEC is not a human being. INEC depends on human beings to get their stuff done. INEC is operating in a constituency of almost 100 million voters. Very few of the other competitors of INEC have that scope of operation. INEC is operating in a logistic environment of several hundreds of thousands of kilometers and dependent on ad hoc staff, because INEC cannot keep all of those people as permanent staff. It will bankrupt the nation. And on day zero, when it's election day, all sorts of unforeseen things can really happen. So Adesua, who was supposed to deliver this to that, suddenly has a cold on that morning. INEC is blindsided. They go to plan B if they see it. And when you look at all the domestic things that happen in our homes on election day, come on. And you know, the notion that an election is a perfect undertaking is one thing that we must all come to grips with. There is no election, not in the best nation in the world, where an election is perfect. And that is why they say that in election jurisprudence, not developed here, developed in the Commonwealth from the UK and spread across the world, it is substantial compliance and material impact that determines whether or not INEC has done its job well. So there will be, because it's human beings, There's nobody that is Mr. INEC. There's no such person.
Well, we're the head of.
Yeah, for the time being. For the time being. And that is why, you know, it's interesting that's my own perspective of it. Once we have institutions that we create, we must not conflict the persons for the time being running those institutions with those institutions. Persons come and go.
But in common speak, how else would we talk about it?
So it's the way that I've made the argument that we conflate our country with our political leaders. So when our political leaders drop the ball, we kick the country. What has the country done to us? Nothing. My country hasn't hurt me. But some of my leaders could do better. Some of my representatives can do better. And that's a very, very important conversation from training, from foundational education.
There's a lack of patriotism.
Well,
or like pride in country.
Yes, there is no conscious ownership of country. It's not a lack of it, it's a conscious ownership that this country, this brand, this Nigeria, this green, white, green is my own. And you, if you want to spoil it, we're going to have a showdown with you. But don't touch this brand.
There's a part in your book where you basically allude to the fact that that you're ready to acquiesce that maybe politicking or our political system can be blamed for a lot of the problems that we see. And I often ask this question to nearly everyone I've spoken to, but do you think that politics in Nigeria, like politicking, do you think it goes against the actual governance, good governance, and the act of governance? Do you think they're at all related?
They are. They are. Even if it might seem that it is not. Given the time I have spent in government, I know some of the questions we've asked ourselves internally after elections. So I know some of the things we've done. So let me give you, and I can only use my example.
Okay.
I went, after I was elected in 2007 as governor, I commissioned a survey around the state that my posters should go back and ask the people of Lagos one question. Now that you have elected a governor, what do you want him to do for you? Name 5 things in your local government. And they came back. And then we went on what was then known as our local government of validating what the report told us. And what we brought back formed the basis of our first budget in 2007 for 2008. So just to make you realize that our politicking is for the ultimate purpose of making things better.
Your politicking?
Our politicking.
Ours?
No.
Or yours?
I was a member of a political party. So it's a question then of how each person, and it wasn't me alone. We had legislators, and some of them really distinguished themselves and acquitted themselves. And in a large pack of representation, some are likely to fall short. And that does not mean then that the entire purpose was not well-intentioned. And you can also speak to time and opportunity and resources. With the very best plans, perhaps some of the resources may have been insufficient.
I wanted to ask you about that actually, especially when it comes to resources, because you talk about how much was budgeted for and then how much was actually dispersed. Can you explain the difference between what is in the budget and what you actually get as a minister of Works and Housing, for example?
This is I won't call it only a federal thing. You see, because People must pay attention to the budgeting process beyond looking for smoking guns in there. That's really perhaps some of the things that people look for. And in my sequel, I'm planning a sequel. I would go into one of the budgeting issues. What is approved as the budget is the authorization by government, especially the National Assembly, who has that power to say this is the limit of what you will spend in this fiscal year. How much you actually then spend is a function of what you raise. Because the budget has a revenue and an expenditure side. Usually, expenditure runs ahead of revenue, and that is why you have deficit budgets that require you to go and borrow. You also then understand that government's revenue does not accrue as once. It comes on a daily basis. They collect money from one importer here at the port. This person pays this VAT or tax, federal corporate tax here, and that, and that, and that, and that, and they aggregate it. So as the monies are aggregated, Ministry of Finance at the federal level has what is called a cash allocation, cash management. Say, how much do we have this month? Okay, how do we fund this? Put this to this, put this to this, put that to that.
So as minister, like how does it, how does it work for you? So is it that on a monthly basis, the Ministry of Finance will say this is how much we have allocated?
Sometimes is, yes, sometimes it's monthly, sometimes it's quarterly. So you wait for 3 months before you get an allocation. So and until you get that allocation, you can't pay your contractors, either those who are about to start work or those who you owe, who have borrowed money to execute your work and who are waiting to get back and to pay their staff as well. So ultimately, in terms of budget performance, I don't know any country that does 100% budget and achieves 100% performance. It may exist, but you would then find out that what you actually get at the end of the year usually is not the full budget that is disbursed.
You talk about people looking for smoking guns in the budget. I'm one of those people. I unfortunately spent 2 days of my life reading all 2,200 and something pages of the budget that we're working on now. And there are a lot of smoking guns there, I would say.
They look like smoking guns.
They look like smoking guns, but
So let me give you one example.
Okay.
There was a project that the project was going to cost about 30 billion. It wasn't a ministry's project. It was a parliamentary project. But the provision in the budget was 200 million for a 30 billion naira project. So it's announced against the odds. And when we tell the legislators sometimes that, look, why don't you let us reduce the number? They say, no, everybody, and you see, the legislature is not necessarily to blame. It's also the electorate. Because when a legislator tells them he's going to pass laws and represent them, they say, no, he has to build something, which is not his work. So he does that. And when those like you looking for a smoking gun see 200 million for the road, and there's nothing wrong, there's nothing going on site. They've collected 200 million, they've run away with the money, but no 200 million was disbursed in many of those instances because it's not even enough to mobilize.
That's not what I mean by a smoking gun.
No, that's part of it.
That's part of it, but I think also what is part of it.
So it creates the impression that money was taken and work not done.
Well, there's also the issue of what money is being put towards.
Okay.
If you see, for example, in the State House, 6 billion being put towards the purchase of new vehicles. If you see within the EFCC budget, there are 3 line items with the exact same budgeted amount, down to 6 naira at the end. And this is in millions, right? That gives the impression...
Have you asked questions about them?
Yes, I have.
What did they tell you?
I asked on the news. I haven't heard anything.
No, not on the news.
I should ask the State House headquarters.
Yes, you see, because...
Why are you budgeting 6 billion naira for a new
sometimes
vehicle?
I have seen some of those things before.
Yes.
And I have seen convincing explanations to some of them. And I am the first to admit that sometimes the way the items are reported may look like repetitions of themselves. And the budget template is not very permissive of detailed explanation. So to the uninitiated, it may look suspicious. To those who are doing it, it's routine. There's nothing wrong. When you ask us, we'll explain it to you.
So we need more transparency in government.
Transparency is something you can't do without, but with a template for reporting, and that's important, the template for preparing that, so you can't put the narrative. Okay? So, and that's a problem. So you might see the same thing repeated, but it's different things, but in the way that it is narrated. And I'm not making any excuses for anybody, but I've been in that situation before having to say, no, this is how this is. And then you see, all of the institutions that we have, we don't interrogate them. Again, this is part of what this book is about. So at the end of the year, we have an audit account. Government has accounts, like any business. Accountant General raises, Auditor General raises audit queries. But you know what? Once the audit queries are raised, the reports are interesting because the smoking guns are really smoking. But what is an audit without a query after all? That's not the story. The story is what is the response to the query? Who follows up? Why should I do an audit and not query you? And why should the news end after I've queried you?
Well, I just don't think that people believe in the good intentions of their ministers or their governors. People just don't believe it. We're looking for, I guess, I would say for me, I'm looking for a smoking gun because of the lack of trust I have in some of the people in government, because of how we view people going into politics for their own personal financial benefits, because the process of actually getting elected is incredibly expensive. If a form is 50 million naira, I expect that you'll go in and you're going to go and recoup it, because that is what is being portrayed. If you see people who are in positions that, as you say, I'm not surprised that your salary is low as a minister, because I pay attention to these things. But then at the end of the day, you would see the children of people in these positions on TikTok flying private planes. And so for the average Nigerian, then, the behavior of the political elite, for lack of a better word, fuels the lack of trust and the lack of belief in their good intentions. And I think that's one thing I wanted to interrogate about your book, because I do understand, and I really want people to read it, because there were times where I had to go and question why I held certain beliefs. And I didn't agree with you on everything, but at least I went back to go and read and say, okay, this is why I believe in this thing. So I feel like everyone should definitely read this book. But I also felt that you were not critical enough of your class, of the political elite's role in why these hyperbolic assumptions exist.
Okay, so the book is not meant to criticize anybody or any class. And so let's be clear about that. And again, so if you're looking for a smoking gun, I may have disappointed you there. The book is just hopefully intended, and hopefully is achieving that. Just asking us, look at this thing again. Does it make sense? In street level conversation, does this thing make sense? That's all. It's not meant to criticize anybody. That's why no names are mentioned.
Yes.
And that's why it's just asking you. Well, we've talked about INEC. We've talked about, okay, major problem we had, road traffic crashes. People die every day. Perhaps more than the things that are engaging our attention. Loss of lives in road traffic accidents, road traffic crashes. And we just say it's bad roads. But the logic to ask yourself is that if the road is bad, is the vehicle likely to crash? Can you speed? And perhaps, as the evidence, some of the evidence I've offered there shows, almost 59%, almost 60% of road traffic crashes are caused by overspeeding. And we are still telling ourselves it's the bad road that caused the accident, when the evidence shows it was overspeeding. And you can't speed on a bad road. If you do, it will be so uncomfortable in the first place. And then your driving competence puts in the question, which suggests, therefore, that most of the road traffic crashes in which property is lost, lives are lost, people are incapacitated for a lifetime, are matters within the control of the driver. And if we want to solve that problem, we should pay more attention to driver training, driver behavior, vehicle management, in addition to improving the quality of the road. So it's just to ask people, are we diagnosing this correctly? If we want to solve the problem of road traffic crashes and the number of people who have sadly gone to early graves.
I agree. I think we need to understand where we are sick so that we know that we're taking the correct medicine. And I think something that is very interesting that you brought up earlier also is I have this huge problem also. In discourse, we expect the wrong things from our legislators. People ask a state assembly member, what bridge did he do? What road did he do? What mobilization exercise did he do? He is a legislator. He's there to write your laws. He's there to make sure that they write, he's there to legislate. He's there to be a check, supposedly a check on the executive arm of government, right? You're asking senators and you're asking House of Reps members, what did they build? But again, they feed into it. And it's probably a feedback mechanism problem because, okay, if they don't send rice, then the people might say they're not doing anything for me. But also by them sending rice, they're going to keep expecting rice. Like there's no reason a senator should plaster his face on a bag of rice and send it to his... It should not happen. It should not happen. That's not the role of a senator. I mean, so that's what I'm saying about this conversation. It needs to be had on both sides because, yes, the average Nigerian should not expect their senators to be doing these things for them. And at the same time, the senator, we should also know that why is the senator sending a bag of rice or a pepper grinder? But I've learned from speaking to people in the political space that if you don't do these things, you probably will not get voted for. And something you do in your book is talk about the role of the citizen. So what do you want people to pay attention to in terms of their roles as citizens? I think that should be our amazing
So I think that the role of the citizen is very, very clearly spelled out in the Constitution. Protect and respect the insignia, the flags, and the colors of Nigeria. Help law enforcement agency by providing support for them. And that support includes sharing information. So we see it in other parts of the world where it is citizens who provide information to law enforcement that helps them to apprehend criminals who threaten society. That's part of the citizen's duty. Respect the rights and the dignity of other citizens as a basis for peaceful cohabitation. So don't troll others on ethnic,
or religious
ideologies,
Yeah.
disagree, but don't abuse, express your views, and all of that. Pay your taxes, and those kind of things. Those are the things that our Constitution asks of us because we are citizens of Nigeria.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time. I've taken lots of your time today. So thank you so much for excellency. You know, I think I would now have to release the first conversation we had so people can know that we've spoken more about like you growing up and your childhood and your time in office. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You know, I would not have been a lawyer if not for you. So it's very, for me, I'm very honored that you accepted my request to speak about your book, and I'm looking forward to a sequel because I really want you to. I want you to name names in the second part. That is my one request because I want to know who allowed AMCON debtors to purchase discos and jetcos.
You want to know?
I want to know.
It's out there in the open. It's out there in the open.
You're a very good politician. You're not going to give me anything.
No, it's out there in the open. It's just a little fact-checking and you will see it.
Okay.
It's out there in the open.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.